Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to today's webinar, Protecting Your Food Safety, your food supply chain and maintaining continuous improvement through an effective food safety management system. My name's Amy. I'm a member of the marketing team at Perry Johnson Registrar's Food Safety, Inc. I'll be facilitating today's webinar and offering technical support to our speakers. Today, we're really excited to have a number of speakers on a roundtable discussion, including Jacqueline Southey of FSSC, and I'll be introducing them to you all a little bit later on in the presentation. Just before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping notes. To ensure audio quality, all attendees are on mute. However, we do absolutely want to take any questions you might have. To ask a question, you can go ahead and type it into the questions tab of the GoToWebinar control panel and click send. We'll answer as many of those questions as we have time for at the end of the prepared slides. The most frequent questions we get are usually, where can I get the slides, or will a recording be available? And yes, you will be able to access a recording, and the slides will be available from PJRFSI.com after the webinar has completed. So this is just a quick screenshot to show you what you might be looking at on your screen. Depending on your machine or system, it might look a little different, but you'll just go ahead and open that questions tab, type your query in, and click send, and we will hopefully be able to answer all of the questions that are sent in. Whoops, excuse me there. Just before we get started, we've got a quick question for all of you, just to get an idea of who is in the audience today. And that question is your organization currently certified to a GFSI standard? And your options include, yes, we're certified with PJRFSI. Yes, we're certified with another CB. Maybe you're not yet certified, but you're interested in becoming certified, or maybe you're not interested in certification, you're just curious about the topic of today's webinar. So go ahead and get those responses in. We'll give it a few seconds. All responses to the polls are anonymous, so feel free to answer however you wish. And once that's finished and we've gotten some participation, I'll move right along and introduce our first speaker today. And once again, for those of you who might have missed the first little bit of my presentation here, if you have any questions that come up throughout the presentation, you don't have to wait until the end to submit them. Just open the questions tab, type them in, and we will accept them throughout the presentation. Thank you to all who participated in the poll, and this is how everyone answered. It looks like most folks on the call are certified to a GFSI standard, which is always great to see. Moving right along, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker today, and that first speaker is Paul DeMarin. He's the Senior Vice President of Food Safety and Supply Chain at PJRFSI. Paul joined Perry Johnson Registrars in January of this year and has over 35 years of experience in the hospitality, service, and retail agri-food sectors. Before he came to PJRFSI, Paul worked for 15 years in the certification industry with clients in every sector from food safety and supply chain to brand protection and quality. Paul has worked for many years in management system certification as well, and before that, Paul was a professional chef and consultant for over 20 years in major hotel chains, restaurants, private golf courses, and food service organizations. So, Paul, I'm going to hand things over to you, and you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar today. I really appreciate your time. As Amy mentioned, my name's Paul, and I'm the SVP for our Food Safety and Supply Chain Division here. We have a lot that we're going to talk about today on the phone, and we all have the pleasure of welcoming Jacqueline back from the FSSC to discuss brand protection and protecting your supply chain as well. So thank you very much, Jacqueline, for that. I appreciate that. Moving forward, just before we get started here, I want to give just a very quick high-level overview of the organization. Perry Johnson Registrars was founded, about 35 years ago in 1994. We have been at the very, beginning of supply chain registration and certification for quite some time now. We're one of the largest certification bodies in the Americas. And we have, over the last 35 years, achieved several accreditations, including ANAB, UCAS, et cetera. We started expanding overseas in 1999 with our businesses in Japan and Brazil. During that time, PJLA was also founded, and that's our laboratory accreditation business. That was in 1999. As you can see, we continued growing and expanding overseas in Germany, Spain, Canada, Latin America, Thailand, just to name a few. In 2005, another division was formed called PJ&A, and that's our healthcare technology business that specializes in telemedicine, virtual scribing services, etc. In 2012 is when PJRFSI was born, and that was really because of the requirement in the industry at the time to have recognized registration, testing, and certification in the food safety space. We do everything from HACCP to GFSI, organic, gluten-free, many standards like social accountability, SMETA or SA 1000 would be an example, as well CT PAT and different programs with the government as well, like our FSVP and VQIP programs, just to name a few. So we cover and have worked with areas in, organizations over the last 8 years with virtually every sector that's out there. We've worked with companies in import and export, distribution, retail, processors, the farms, you name it. Really, our main goal is to work with organizations to help protect their brand and minimize risk within their supply chain. We currently have about 460 auditors in 60 countries who are on the ground and understand not only the language and requirements of those countries, but also equally important, the culture. We work very hard to maintain a high customer service rating of 9.5 out of 10 in the last 5 years, so we're very proud of that as well. If you take a look at the standards that we currently represent, just on the Perry Johnson Registrar Food Safety side, we have about 30 programs that we support, everything from accredited to unaccredited. Some are client specific, some are retailer mandated, some are government regulated and mandated. And we really define these services into 4 main areas. One would be auditing and certification to accredited third-party standards such as FSSC and the as well as the whole family of ISO standards. We also do second-party assessment, which would be standards that we as the certification body own, have written and developed, like our GMP or GDP, HACCP, etc. And then we also work with organizations to provide services for first-party assessment services, so that would be their own audit checklist. And as I mentioned, we're recognized by various government groups to do audits like FSMA and FSVP. So just because we're, talking about supply chain, this is one of the areas that I love talking about the most. Our main featured topic with Jacqueline today is going to be about protecting the supply chain. So I wanted to talk just for a minute about what we as a CB have been doing and can be doing to support supplier programs from a certification body perspective. The programs are there to manage the supplier risk, as we mentioned, and that can really take a few different forms with us. As I just mentioned, it could be first-party audit protocol or second-party programs, or even a combination of both. And now when you look at this picture here on the screen, I want to bring just a couple of things to your attention. I sometimes like to, try and add a little humor here, because if you look at the supply chain picture on the left, I always say it's pretty straightforward and easy to understand, but that's really not accurate at all. It's extremely intricate and very confusing on its best day. And the top right with the cats and dogs, that's very accurate that I see with a lot of organizations where they're looking at the risk in front of them without considering all of the risks around them. And that really, to me, is what supply chain is about. It's about managing all of the risks that could be present, not just food safety risks, not just quality. And it's often been said that suppliers are your greatest risk to your business, which I think is true. So it's critical that when you're looking to build and develop a program, you look at it with a much larger lens than just food safety. So here is an example. Many times when I start talking to our customers and our clients about their supplier audit programs and the risk, usually, the discussions are sometimes narrow in scope and they're talking mostly about food safety or quality. But there are many areas, as you can see here, that really have a great deal of risk to your business, and it should be part of your considerations or your protocol when you're developing them. So do you have a solid understanding of expectations? Do your suppliers? Do they have a management approach that's complementary to yours? Do they have capacity to manage your business? Are you a sole supplier? What about things like social responsibility or environmental health and safety or even concerns like financial stability. You know, there's nothing wrong with focusing a program on the GMP aspect of it, or food safety or quality, but I always want to make sure that our customers know that we can, and most of the time should, go deeper. If we take a look just for a moment at management approach, this is a sample of some of the additional questions that we could include in an audit program around management approach to ensure that your suppliers are a good fit to your business. You can consider audit questions that include the future vision of your suppliers, and if it's complementary to yours, or looking at changes that they're making or that they have made in their environment to support your future growth. Can they handle capacity and things like that? Do they have appropriate controls in place? How are they managing things like business continuity planning? I've mentioned this many times, but there were not too many of us out there that were expecting a global pandemic. So how many of your key suppliers had contingency plans in place to address this need for yourself? Now, if you look at financial stability, again, this is not often looked at in a food safety audit. In my opinion, this is really something that you should be considered or that you should be concerned about because your supplier's financial stability is critical to your business and the future growth of your business. So oftentimes companies will tell me that they're not really sure how they can ensure their suppliers are financially stable, or it's hard to ask them these questions, or they don't want to open their books during an audit. And I certainly understand this, but oftentimes I find that companies who are not willing to share this type of information are not necessarily ones that you want to be involved with. There's many ways that you can look at this. We can ask different pertinent questions of the business that can help us paint a picture of financial stability. So I'm just going to stop it at this point and pass it back to Amy. You know, just to wrap up my portion today, I want to thank you for listening to me. I want to thank you for joining this webinar, and I'll pass it back to Amy. I'll talk to you in a little bit later. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Paul. Let me just go ahead and introduce our first guest, Jacqueline Southey, the North America representative of FSSC. FSSC is the globally recognized GFSI benchmarked food safety certification system. Based in Washington, D.C., Jacqueline works to build a broader understanding of how accredited FSSC 22000 certification can contribute to global harmonization in food safety, forge international compliance, and meet the needs of the public and private sectors. A native of the UK, Jacqueline graduated with a BSc in agricultural science and a PhD in animal science from the University of Nottingham, and has a background in transatlantic business development. So Jacqueline, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today, and I'll hand it over to you. So whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thank you very much, Paul. And thank you to PJR for this opportunity to talk to you today. So what I'm going to do is, if I can get these to move on. So what we're going to do, as Paul said, is to talk about managing the risk in the supply chain with FSSC 22000. And I have to thank Paul for setting the stage and you know, providing some background information on all those things that we have to think about. And what I'm hoping to do is to show how FSSC, with its management system framework, is set up to do just that, to sort of raise awareness of those risks and to manage them. So we talk an awful lot about FSSC and, you know, the management system framework. So today what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to just go back to basics and talk about what is a management system. And I'm delighted to be able to do this with PJR because of the expertise that they already have in the management system approach. I'm going to talk about how FSSC manages the risk in the supply chain and how this contributes to developing a food safety culture. And then I'm also going to come back to a little bit about what Paul referred to with the pandemic and, you know, how the management system approach, you know, did actually help companies to be braced a little bit for the untoward events that came through with the development of the coronavirus, and then talk about information and how we can support you. So let's go back to basic. What actually is a management system? So essentially, as it's self-explanatory, a management system is just the way an organization manages its business, how it manages the interrelated parts of its business in order to achieve its objectives. So that's fairly straightforward. Anybody that's running a business, doing an operation, has a system to conduct that business. An ISO management system is a standard that draws on global experience, and the International Standard Organization has been going for many years. Since 1947 it was founded, and it was intended to draw on expertise to develop the best way of doing things. And the principle still applies to the management system approach. So it is a publicly available standard that draws on global experience, all different situations, all different risks, all different objectives, to define the best practice for a process. And it's aimed at helping organizations optimize its performance, achieve its goals and objectives, and creating an organizational culture that supports those objectives and reflexively engages in a continuous cycle of self-evaluation correction. And that's what we refer to the PDCA cycle, the plan, do, check, act cycle. So many of these things, these terms, you've probably heard already. We've talked about management system frameworks, we've talked about PDCA, we've talked about risk-based thinking. And so I'm going to put that into context in sort of from an FSSC point of view. So typical ISO management systems, you're probably already familiar with. ISO 9000 is a very typical, widely used management system to control quality management. And effectively, it defines the process for managing customer expectations, addressing continuing improvement to achieve optimum quality of a product. And that applies to any company. Quality management is important to any company producing a product or producing a service. And certification 29000 shows to your customer that you are adhering to those principles, and it is in their interest that you want to meet their expectations. 14001 is for environmental management. And so you probably will be familiar with this. You may already be running the 14001. It's very important these days for sustainability requirements, and it addresses the requirements or defines the requirements for assuring a company's environmental sustainability. So a lot of the work is done, the information and the processes and the requirements are very well laid out, they're very comprehensive, and they provide a company a guideline to achieve optimal environmental management. 45001 is for occupational health and safety, and this of course has come to the forefront while we're managing the risks to the workers in the workplace, whether it's from a process, whether it's from equipment, or has been brought into focus in 2020 with possible infection from the coronavirus. So that could be an occupational hazard, and companies are obviously looking to the requirements of 45000 to optimize or to best protect their worker. And 22000 is the food safety management system, and this applies to any company in the food supply chain, those companies that Paul has identified, whether they're producing packaging, whether they're producing food, whether they're in transport and storage, and they're all, it's the management system that provides the outline for them to manage the risks and to protect the supply chain. So let's go into a little bit more detail about these. So all of them are global management systems. So some of the benefits are sort of internationally recognized, which is extremely beneficial to a global industry. And again, this is another way of protecting the supply chain if everybody is producing to the same standard. They outline and describe procedures to improve efficiency. So, I mean, they are business objectives, and the optimum business is going to improve efficiency by reducing waste, by optimizing the role of their workers, to look after their workers, and all these processes that are going to improve an efficient business. Their goal is to improve customer satisfaction and confidence. With the food safety management system, obviously customer satisfaction is a safe customer. So the objective is all the same. It can be just a different format depending on the sector or the industry. All of the management systems are set up to require management commitment. They all define the role of leadership and require engagement and involvement of employers. And this promotes a culture of continuous improvement, expectation, and awareness of the workers in what their role is. And they provide a common platform across an industry, across a sector, across a nation, and across the globe. So with this consistency, you have all these advantages of everybody moving in the same direction with the same expectations of their customer and of their suppliers, and they're all working towards the same end. So we also talk about the HLS, and in 2018, ISO 22000 were revised to the HLS. This was very beneficial because what it did, it updated ISO 22000 to the same platform, and the platform is the higher level structure. And this is the platform or the structure of the standard, which was intended to promote standardization across all the different management systems. It improves efficiency for a company because if they're running the different management systems, they have to do many of the common activities. And it also allows for a better awareness of risk management because the different sectors within a company can share expertise, and it promotes teamwork and even extends the promotion of sort of good culture within a company. So the HLS is made up of 10 common clauses across all these management systems. So whether they're quality management system in 9001, an environmental management system in 14001, or food safety management in 22000, they have the same 10 common clauses within the requirements and within the standard. And these, as I said, allow for better integration between standards. It improves process approach within a company and enhances risk-based thinking. And all of the standards are based on this plan, do, check, act, which leads to the sort of resiliency and protection of reviewing and improvement, continuous improvement, and reviewing a situation, because situations don't stay the same. Situations change constantly, risks change, and objectives change. So it's a constantly dynamic situation which is process-based and is moving towards continuous improvement. And it's the same format. And so this format, and why is FSSC 22000 a food safety management system? The reason is because ISO 22000 provides the framework of FSSC 22000. So FSSC, as I'm sure you will know, stands for Food Safety System Certification. And it's a system certification because it's based on ISO 22000. ISO 22000 was first published in 2005, and it provided a common management system, as we talked about, for the supply chain to manage food safety, but it's sort of concurrent with GFSI. And ISO 22000 alone does not meet the requirements of FSSC of GFSI. So FSSC was developed to provide the additional components of the certification program to meet the GFSI requirements. And I'll come back to a little bit of that right now, a little bit later. But essentially, the certification program consists of all the requirements of ISO 22000, which makes it a food safety management system. It defines the prerequisite programs to give it as required by GFSI and to give it more robustness and more defined prerequisite programs to maintain the cleanliness and hygienic situations of the environment, the different sectors, and the additional requirements that are updatable by FSSC to provide the additional governance as required by GFSI. So, as I mentioned, ISO 22000 on its own is a very powerful food safety management system, but it has no scheme owner and it's not benchmarked by the GFSI. So FSSC provides the additional governance. We own the scheme, we monitor it, we provide the integrity program, we provide the requirements for certification using a system of licensed CBs like Perry Johnson. We have requirements for auditor qualification to ensure the robustness and the consistency of the certification across the world, again, to protect the supply chain. We also have a sanction policy for when those requirements aren't met. And we also, most importantly for the supply chain, we have a free public registry of those companies that have achieved FSSC certification, which is on our website. And so that provides the value to the brand owners to check that their suppliers are actually authentically certified by FSSC and meet all the requirements of ISO 22000, are applying the approved prerequisite programs and meet the additional requirements of FSSC. So let's come back to the ISO HLS framework, which these are the 10 requirements that are in the management system in 22000. These are the same 10 clauses as I mentioned that are in 45,000, in 14,000 and 9,000. So they define the requirements, they define what the scope of the standard, whether it's going to be quality management or food safety management, defines references. And if we focus on food safety, the references are very important to make sure that everybody is talking the same language, well, even in the same language, to use the same terminology. Obviously, I'm English, and we all know the problems that we have sometimes with interpretation between sort of the use of English in America and the use of English in England, and sometimes the same word can mean different things. So I'm extremely adamant about the use of good terms and definitions. And then the context of the organization, which is new to the HLS, is very important for the protection of the supply chain. And this really is the strength of the new HLS in 22000. So this is different in many of the standards. So because the context, obviously, of the different management systems are going to be different, and the way and the operation and the way the goals are achieved are also different. So clause 4 and clause 8 tend to be different in the different management systems. And if we focus on 22000, this is the part of the standard that is going to be looking at that big picture that Paul defined. It's actually defined as as clause 4, defining the context of the organization. And in 4.1, understanding the organization and its context. 4.2, understanding the needs and expectations of the interested parties. And determining the scope of the management system and defining the scope of the management system in 4. So the context of the organization puts it in, you've got to decide, you've got to determine who what your objectives are, who your customers are, what your risks are, your risks and opportunities, what your market is, what your stakeholders are, and that's all led into planning. And if you determine your risks, how you're going to control them, and these risks could be sort of changes in market, it could be changes in demands of the customer, it could be socio-economic changes, and it could be a pandemic. And you have to review these at regular intervals, because, as we said, this is a dynamic situation and it changes, and you have to keep reviewing it. Your suppliers may change, the demands of your customer may change, and this sets up the basis for your management system. So this defines the risks and opportunities of your system. You have to look at the big picture. And the standard actually defines lots of these elements that you need to look at. The operation is also different, and this in the management system is your hazard plan. This is your hazard control operation. So this is where you have to identify and define the hazards actually of the food that you are making, and define how you will control it. And then you have to evaluate that and improve it. So what we talk about in ISO 22000 is we actually have 2 PDCA cycles. You have the context of the organization, the big risks for the big picture, the supply chain, the suppliers, the regulations, and then you have the internal PDCA of the operation, where you define your hazards and your control points and your verification and your monitor. monitoring. And then it gets back into the big picture of the performance evaluation and improvement, and that's the big PDCA that goes all the way around. So that's, I think I've jumped ahead of myself actually, I apologize. But that's the HLS framework, that's the common framework. I think we go into more detail, how we go into more detail of this. So this is the application of the risk-based approach. The context of the organization, which is the same across all the management systems, and whether you're working in environmental management, you have to, or operational health and safety, food safety management, you have to understand the organization, the context, its needs, the expectations of the interested parties. You have to define what these risks and opportunities may be. Maybe there's a new market. Maybe you want to think about growing into another market. Maybe there's risks from a change in climate. Maybe food fraud is going to become a risk. And all this has to be documented for implementation and review. So this is the basis of this risk-based approach, and this is a team exercise, and this is where you would have to gather members from all across the company. You would probably gather people from operations, from HR, or which would marketing that knows the market. So it would be a brainstorming exercise, and this is where, as Paul says, you look at the big picture. And this is a new element into ISO 22000 2018 and into FSSC 22000. And this is a very powerful element. And this is really the strength of the management system, because the management system is really a way of doing things. It's not just an audit. It's not just a certification program. It is a way of doing things. So, as I mentioned, in 22000, those risks may come from suppliers, changing conditions, changing climate, changing customer requirements. You'd have to consider food fraud, intentional adulteration, all of these elements. And your stakeholders that you would have to consider would be your customers. Maybe they have different needs now. You may have a break in your supply chain. And again, these have to be reviewed constantly. So you have to keep coming back to see if these risks still exist. Maybe they're no longer there. Maybe you can mitigate them. Maybe you have other risks. Maybe new opportunities have come. So again, it brings in this dynamic situation. And to compare this, is a 45,000 also has a clause 4, and you have to consider the risks and the context of the organization within clause 4 as a comparison. I put this in as a comparison. So you'd have to consider the risks to the workers from sort of physical, environmental, or social elements. Stakeholders might consider other workers might consider insurers. If you have a good occupational health and safety policy, then your insurance is going to be impacted. If you don't have, you probably have higher insurance obligations. There's also regulations to protect your workers. So if you already have 45,000 and you're considering the risks and the context of the organization within 45,000, you can see how you might apply that same risk-based thinking to 22,000 should you want to implement the food safety management system. Considering this in the context of the pandemic, I think is always useful, and it puts it into perspective. And it also is a way of looking at, sort of how you think about this risk-based thinking, because that's it's a constantly changing element, and you have to keep reviewing it. Your supply chain might have broken through the pandemic. Your customers will have changed. There was this huge swing within the supply chain at the beginning of the pandemic. And if you had this process in place, you would be constantly reviewing it. And we know that a lot of companies that did have ISO 22000 employed were a lot more resilient to deal with these changes, because they were aware of it and they were reviewing it, and they could predict a certain amount of these changes. So that's another way that you would protect your supply chain. You're looking at these changes, you're looking externally as well as internally. So again, the risk-based approach is extended through to clause 8, and in 22,000, this would be your hazard control plan. And this again is a risk-based system to address your hazards, control your risks. And if you're already operating a hazard plan and you see that way of the risk-based approach, identifying your hazards, determining what risk they are, how you're going to control them, reviewing it to see if your control's in place, and then redressing it, coming back to the beginning. That's an indication of how you can take that bigger and into the big PDCA of the management system using clause 4. And again, clause 8 actually in 2018 includes an emergency preparedness requirement for an emergency preparedness and response process, which also was very useful, came into play at the beginning of the pandemic. And as part of the management system, there is a need to document these processes, these procedures, document these meetings, document these conclusions, document these plans, because things change, but you always have the benefit of being able to go back to the documents to see how they change, to keep that institutional knowledge, to benefit from it, and to move on to the next achievement. So again, we've talked about operational control of risk in clause 8, where in 22,000 you have to consider risks from the suppliers, from the ingredients, from the processes, and the hazard control plan is implemented to mitigate those risks. When you compare it to 45,000, you have to have an operational control of risk. You'd be identifying the risks from the workers, from the equipment, from obstacles, from some of their activities that they're doing. And then you'll have a process to mitigate those risks, maybe by removing the obstacles or minimizing exposure. And again, if you put that into the context of the pandemic, occupational health becomes extremely important, and it also feeds in as a risk to food safety management. Again, this provides a basis for risk-based thinking, and it brings us back to that big picture that Paul described at the beginning. So going through, this is just a quick schematic of the two PDCA approaches of ISO 22000, where you're considering the external issues, the internal issues and the requirements, identifying the risk of opportunities, and how you put it into a plan, how it's involved in the food safety management system, and the PDCA cycle of the hazard control plan. And then all of this provides the resiliency and the support of the food safety management system. And again, as Paul mentioned, you know, there are many risks in the supply chain, and many of these things we have to consider. And these would be things that would be communicated and talked about within the meeting. And although, as I said, ISO 22000 is a way of doing things, it's a management system, it's not just an audit. There are benefits of certification, and then sort of working with PJR, again, we have this benefit of a licensed certification body that offers FSSC 22000, and that certification provides the assurance. It provides your customer with insurance and awareness that you're running this management system, that you are aware of those risks, and you're running this process that is internationally accepted using that platform, which has many benefits, not only for language, for sharing of staff, but also using IT platforms as well. You have a common framework, you have common terms, you have a common standard. Also, its integrity, it provides the integrity. You're using a accredited certification body as PJR, providing confidence that the standard is consistent and that you can be confident of the certification, whether it's conducted in Chicago or whether it's in Tokyo. And with that integrity has that added safeguard against fraudulent certificates or fraudulent activities, providing the business-to-business benefits, of course, through our GFSI benchmarking and the transparency, because, as I mentioned, the certificates on the public website. So really quickly, just want to talk about the impact of the pandemic, which I think we all know. We've been living it, we've been breathing it, we've been avoiding it, and we have experienced this supply chain disruption, the skewed resources, which with that risk-based thinking, that review of your customer requirements, is going to make you more aware. The travel restrictions, of course, has had an impact on the audits, which we have made means to address. The food service and restaurant industry has been turned upside down. The workers have been impacted because of infections and because of workers perhaps being fearful or unsure of going into work. And again, these management system approaches all to help come through that. It's focusing on the supply chain, becoming aware of the needs of the customer. Maybe the customer is no longer a restaurant, maybe it's now retail, having to deal with that. The risk-based hazard control is monitoring that and monitoring not only the monitoring both the environment, also of course monitoring your product, making sure that your product is going through to the same place, and it's not going to spoil, it's not being wasted. And the validation and the verification and documentation is important in keeping everybody in track. And again, with the crisis, the internal audits that's required in the PDCA is very important. The risk assessment is dependent on internal audits. So a company is responsible for its own monitoring of its system. It doesn't necessarily need the external certification body because it has this management system, it has this culture of responsibility, and it has this commitment to food safety, and it uses internal audits for its monitoring and assessment and continuous improvement. So again, with providing resilience through the pandemic and providing that visibility to the supply chain. So just real quick, because I'm aware that I've probably talked too much already. This is the public website. These are where you can find the certificates, FSSC certificates worldwide. And also this is where you can find additional information. We have full information about the scheme, we have extra information. We have guidance on the website, have information on our certified organizations, our certification bodies, our training organizations, and we also have a development program which can start you off in FSSC 22000 food safety management. We have the scheme documents in translations, as I said, guidance documents, food fraud, food defense, food safety culture, brochures and videos, sort of if you're interested in different aspects, and then we have a newsletter that I would advocate you signing up to keep in touch. So thank you very much. I think we've come to the end, and I'd be pleased to join the panel to discuss.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. I really appreciate that. It was certainly great content, very timely, and we're definitely going to have the recordings and PowerPoint available for download afterwards as well. So we've already introduced Jacqueline. Let me now introduce you to the rest of our panel. I'm going to start on the left with Lauren Maloney, and she is our Program and Accreditation Manager at PJRFSI. Lauren has over 10 years of experience in the field of sustainable agriculture and food production. She brings her production and management knowledge to the Food Safety Program Administrative position, manager position, and she manages essentially all of our food programs, SQF, FSSC, BRC, Global GAP, gluten-free, HACCP, GMP, and many others. So she's certainly very, very busy. She's also our in-house trainer for Global GAP and an inspector for fruit and vegetable scopes. In addition to agriculture and food production, she holds her MS in conservative biology and has a very diverse background and knowledge base, and certainly a real benefit and asset to our program here. I'd also like to introduce Shannon Craddock, and Shannon is our Program and Accreditation Manager at PJR. Now, Shannon has about 20 years of experience in accredited management systems, specializing in automotive and sustainability. Before serving as PJR's Program and Accreditation Manager, Shannon worked for large Tier 1 automotive supplier, championing management systems compliance for North America. She's also worked extensively in the field of anti-doping in Olympic and Paralympic sport with such agencies such as the United States Olympic Committee, the United States Anti-Doping Agency, the Canadian Center for Ethics in Sport, and the Doping Control Center of Taiwan. Shannon has a master's degree from the University of Michigan School of Public Health and has a focus of environmental health and radiation biology. So thank you everyone to our panel for joining. The way this is going to work is I am going to ask our panel questions and allow them an opportunity to respond. And then when we're finished this part of it, we'll open it up for audience Q&A. So Jackie, let me start with you. How is food safety culture developed within the ISO 22000 management system approach?
So thank you, Paul. And that's a very important question. And I actually would probably say that you can't really implement an ISO 22000 management system without a good food safety culture, because you need all those elements of commitment to, to meet the requirements of the ISO 22000 system. So I think we all agree that a company's culture is established, by its management. And as I said, you have to have management commitment to meet the requirements of 22,000. And these are sort of a process to providing leadership, resources, and the appropriate environment to make food safety. So, and this is important because the GFSI defines, I'm going to read this, defines food safety culture as shared values, beliefs, and norms that affect the mindset and behavior toward food safety in and across an organization. And this is what ISO 22000 defines. It achieves, this mindset with the requirement to actually establish a system that we talked about already, through those clauses built around leadership, communication, and process, and continuous improvement. So 22,000. So while 22,000 is sort of identifying sort of those goals and setting up those defined processes for achieving food safety, the culture comes along because everybody knows that the requirements are there for competence and engagement, and the workers, as part of this process, the workers know what their goals are because there's also this need for communication. So if the workers know what their particular goals are and how they achieve them, then this builds the basis of the culture. So it's this communication, engagement, and involvement. And this is how, and the process builds the culture because everybody knows that this needs to be done. We've actually seen this through the pandemic where, if culture is sort of defined as doing the right thing when no one's looking, we've seen this because, people have been absent, they've been working from home, and yet the culture is still there because people know what's expected of them and they need to know what they need to do. Right. So that's already there. What we have done as part of this sort of increasing requirement with the GFSI, as part of the guidance, we do have guidance on the website because the GFSI requires, as part of the audit process, to provide evidence of this. You need to provide evidence of senior management commitment and how they are doing the communication, the training, and to get feedback from the employers that we're saying are now engaged. So as part of this, we do have guidance on the website that is, freely available. It's there for download. You can have a look. And we kind of have listed sort of the questions that which an auditor might want to ask, who they would approach to find out, to get a gauge of how that food culture is, where that food safety culture is. So it's a thing that's building its process, and it's inherent. If you have the process, we believe that it's inherent, but we do have that guidance. So you could go and audit the organization using these questions based on the GFSI requirements. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for that. Shannon, I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, what do you think are the benefits of implementing two different ISO management systems within an organization or an integrated management approach?
Thanks, Paul. I think there are a lot of benefits to an integrated management system. And I always try to get organizations to think in terms of a business operating system, as opposed to a number of different management systems operating in silos. For example, this is the way we handle food safety matters, and this is the way we manage environmental health and safety matters. Instead, think of a business operating system, i.e., this is the way we operate because it's good business. It's what we do every day. It's organic. It's intrinsic to our employees. And folks don't need to prepare for an audit or cram for an exam that way. With integrated management systems, there are many common elements. Jacqueline said on some of these: internal auditing, management review, the management of risk. And these common elements force a unified multidisciplinary approach to implementing a management system. And with this multidisciplinary approach, you bring in a fresh set of eyes. Food safety perspectives are heard by EH&S managers and vice versa. Additionally, as Jacqueline mentioned, the pandemic has forced implementation of health and safety measures for workers. There's temperature screens, PPE is required even in office settings. 45001, or an occupational health and safety management system, helps to ensure that these measures are implemented in a strategic and measurable way. The pandemic really has changed mindsets. There's more emphasis on work from home, minimizing the environmental footprint. So I think a lot more companies are going to be thinking about 14001 certification as well. One, really valuable benefit is the cost savings to integrated management systems. So if you're implementing more than one system, up to a 20% integration discount is possible in terms of audit days or audit time. Now, 10% of that is going to come from the organization's level of integration itself. Some systems may be more integrated than others. And then 10% is going to come from the certification body's ability to field a competent audit team, competent in all disciplines. And that's something that I know PJR and PJRFSI have the resources to do. Additionally, implementing an integrated management system now, at this point in time during the pandemic, there's additional cost savings due to the fact that we can do some remote auditing. And remote auditing will certainly continue after the pandemic because we've learned a lot of valuable lessons. And many things can be audited just as effectively when done remotely. Not to mention the internal savings to the organization from an operational standpoint. There are certainly efficiencies gained from things like a single unified internal audit or management review, or even a process to manage risk.
Thank you very much, Shannon. I appreciate that as well. Lauren, let's move to you now here, if you don't mind. What would you think are some of the benefits of having a fully remote FSSC audit, and how do you think that is going to work?
Yeah, no problem. So FSSC released a fully remote audit option in October to allow for certified sites to continue their certification when a serious event prevents an on-site audit. The benefit of a remote audit is that the audit is conducted through the use of ICT, or information communication technology, on a platform such as GoToMeeting, and maybe with file sharing software such as SharePoint, which are both two programs that PJRFSI uses. This allows the auditor to be in another place to conduct the audit. Prior to the audit, PJR conducts a risk assessment for the feasibility of the audit to take place remotely, and to be able to achieve the audit objectives. PJR will take into consideration the maturity of the organization's food management system and past performance, whether remote auditing can be accommodated by the organization. For example, are the procedures and records able to be shared electronically, and can the remote auditing software allow for all areas of the audit to be covered, including witnessing production? And then on the day of the audit, the auditor and organization will log into the secure ICT platform. And like I said before, PJR uses GoToMeeting, but other secure platforms can be used upon request. And the organization must be in operation in order for a fully remote audit to take place. The audit takes place just like an on-site audit would, where the auditor conducts an opening meeting, interviews employees, reviews documents and records, conducts a site tour, communicates the nonconformities, and then conducts the closing meeting. Finally, PJR has controls in place to make sure if ICT is utilized and it does not function properly or prevents a robust audit from taking place, the audit shall be ended and suitable follow-up actions determined in line with audit schedule and FSSC requirements.
Thanks, Lauren. I appreciate that as well. Just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, feel free to post those in the chat box. So now, Jacqueline, moving back to you, and I'm afraid just because of time, we're going to have to maybe try and reduce our answers to about 2 minutes each. But Jacqueline, how do you assess the risks and opportunities for a food organization?
Well, so in the same ways that you would do for any other company. As I said, this should be a team effort, involving management with input from all sectors. as we've heard already, the occupational health has the same issues, and so all sectors, including operations, marketing, etc., would all come together and look at risks and opportunities they might conduct a SWOT analysis. Or I would probably suggest that they consult with expertise in their certification body. As we've seen already by your own comments, PJR would be a great resource to help with this. And it's all related to that sort of clause 4 exercise, looking at the context of the organizations and pulling out of that the risks and opportunities. So I'd send them to you, Paul. That's a quick answer.
Okay. Well, perfect. Yes, we'll certainly take that. You're right though, Jacqueline. Certification bodies, if not with us, they have a lot of experts internally, and any of those questions, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to support. But Lauren, just coming back to you then for a moment, what are some of the differences between, we hear partially remote and fully remote. So can you maybe help clarify that a bit?
Yeah, no problem. So a partial remote audit requires both a remote portion and on-site portion. And this type of audit can be used for initial surveillance and recertification, where a fully remote audit can only be used for surveillance and recertification for a company that's been impacted by a serious event. The partial remote option is both an accredited and a GFSI approved option. And it's a permanent addition to the FSSC policies. The fully remote option is also an accredited audit. However, it is not approved by GFSI. However, we believe that maintaining certification during the pandemic is extremely important to our food safety systems in place, and a remote audit can be an effective alternative when on-site audit cannot be conducted.
Okay, that's great. Important to know. Jacqueline, I have a lot of clients that ask me this as well, but what, in your opinion, is the difference between ISO 22000 and, say, ISO 9001?
So I think, as I explained, so 9001 is a quality management system. ISO 22000 is a food safety management system. They have many common clauses, as we talked about, particularly sort of through the HLS. 9000 applies to any company. ISO 22000 only applies to those companies operating within the food supply chain. But if you have a food company that's already 9001 certified, they already have the HLS, they already have the same clauses, they already have a PDCA cycle to sort of look into the risks and opportunities for a food company. What they don't have is they don't have that second PDCA cycle from clause 8. They don't have a hazard control plan. They're not obligated to implement the prerequisite programs. They don't have the traceability, emergency preparedness, or that sort of verification, monitoring, and review. So it's that second clause 8 that has to come in. If they've already 9001, they're very familiar with the language, and they can implement 22000 just by sort of adding the HACCP and hazard control plan into that management system format. They may be already running a HACCP plan, but it needs to come into that big PDCA plan of that management system. If they're 22,000 certificate and they want to add 9,000, they can integrate that in the same way. And actually FSSC does have a certificate of FSSCQ in which the two management systems can be operated side by side. So a lot of similarities, but that food safety aspect of HACCP is unique to 22,000.
Okay, thanks, Jacqueline. Shannon, I'm just going to wrap this up then, my portion here anyway, with you. If a site is starting with a food safety standard and using the integrated management thought process here, what would you suggest are some strategies they could use for adding an additional standard such as 9001 or ISO 45001 for health and safety as an example?
Great question, Paul. So I always recommend that an organization starts with a gap analysis to determine what the deltas are. A lot of the delta requirements are rooted in risk. So for example, for a 14001 environmental management system, one of the areas that would not be present in a food safety management system is an analysis of environmental aspects. and then the implementation of programs to manage the ones that are most significant, or an analysis of occupational health and safety standards, and then implementation of programs to mitigate the most significant risks and hazards. Again, I see that when an organization implements a new standard, most companies do fairly well with the operational requirements. So those, rooted in section 7 and 8, but they tend to struggle with the management system pillars. The common elements such as internal audit, management review, systems for corrective action and things of that nature. And those are the common elements. So it's interesting that the common elements are where organizations most struggle. So they're already there, they're halfway there, based on the fact that there's so many common requirements.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's certainly good, a good take on that. Lauren, I guess, sorry, just my very last question. Is the certificate the same for a remote audit as it is for an on-site audit?
Yes, the certificate is basically the same. The PJRFSI and accreditation body logo will appear on the certificate. The only difference is that a fully remote audit will have the words full remote audit on it. And then, if a client was issued a fully remote audit certificate, once the pandemic is over and an on-site audit can be conducted, then the certificate can be reissued, removing the reference to fully remote audit.
Okay, great. Thanks for the clarification on that. So I think that is it. I don't know if we have any questions, but Amy, I think we're probably at our time here. This is just an update on a couple of webinars we have coming up next week, so please take some time to look at that. But at that point, I'm going to pass it back to Amy in case we have any questions, or if we have to wrap it up, I guess we can address questions at a later date as well.
Yeah, no problem, Paul. Let me just take a look here. It doesn't look like there's any questions that have come in so far, but I will encourage anyone, if you did have anything, maybe something very specific to your company's situation that you maybe didn't want to explain or couldn't explain in a succinct question here, please do feel free to reach out to PJR with any questions you might have, regarding certification, maybe what options would be best for you. If we don't know the answer, we will definitely either try to find the answer for you or put you in touch with someone who does have the right answer. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and see, do we have any parting words of advice or wisdom from our speakers? Jacqueline, any parting words of wisdom there?
No, I'd just like to thank you for this opportunity, and I really appreciated having Shannon and Lauren on board as well. I really appreciated the answers, and I think that was a great contribution, so thank you for that.
Absolutely. It's always great to have multiple perspectives on things. Shannon, Lauren, any parting words for the audience?
None for me. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this PJRFSI webinar.
Thanks everybody for joining.
All right, I did get a quick question in here from one of the attendees regarding the slides. The slides will be available for download from pjrfsi.com. So keep an eye out for those. Usually we'll have them up between 24 to 48 hours after the webinar is over. So with that, Paul, any parting words for the audience?
Just thank you, everyone. Stay safe out there. Hopefully we're going to be turning the corner here at some point in the near future, and we look forward to helping you in 2021. So thank you, Jacqueline, Lauren, and Shannon, and Amy, as always, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you all so much, and thank you to all of our attendees for taking the time. I will go ahead and close things out for today. Thank you all so much, and stay safe, stay healthy, and we hope to see you on the next webinar. Have a great day.